2022 was yet another record year for global warming. Global temperatures are increasing rapidly, especially in the oceans, which hit an all-time high in temperature. The warming of our planet is causing a cascade of negative consequences. This is the first part in a series all about climate change, how we attempt to move forward. Part 1. We have to understand the problem. The mechanism of global warming is quite simple to understand, actually. The sun's radiation comes beaming down. Now the Earth can also radiate that heat back out into space, but the wavelength of light increases as it gets reflected back out. Now there are certain molecules in the atmosphere of the Earth that can allow that light from the sun to pass through it, but on its way back out into space, it gets absorbed by those molecules, particularly CO2 and methane. So think of it like a blanket. The air that's invisible to us is trapping heat and radiation from the sun, keeping it close within us, keeping us warmer. Now, if there's too much blanket, you're too hot. In the same way, if there's too much greenhouse gases, the Earth becomes too hot. Every molecule emitted contributes to making the Earth warmer, just a teeny bit. Now, we emit about 40 billion tons every single year as a species. It's got to have some effect, and we can measure it. Satellites from all over the world have been taking global temperature readings for decades. We also have thousands of weather stations on the ground, data going back to the 1800s, people in ships and ground stations. Thousands of data points allow us to understand the temperatures of the globe going back centuries. And what we find is that the temperatures of the Earth are increasing. The increase of Earth's temperature is causing a terrible cascade of climatic changes. We're causing rapid changes in the climate. But how do we know it's us causing the change and not just the sun? Well, two main ways. We know the sun isn't getting warmer. If anything, it's getting cooler. But if it was the sun causing the warming, we would expect the stratosphere, a layer of the atmosphere above the troposphere, to get warmer as well. But we see the opposite. We see stratosphere cooling. This could only be the case if something in the lower atmosphere is stalling warm air from reaching the stratosphere, aka greenhouse gases. The second smoking gun? Carbon isotopes. These are like fingerprints to human-caused climate change. Plants love to use lighter weight C12 isotopes. And since fossil fuels are mostly made of plants, which contain C12, when we burn it, it decreases the C13 to C12 ratio in the atmosphere. Every molecule of CO2 we emit has a human fingerprint to it. We know exactly how much we're causing the problem. It's 100%. We could power all of humanity with only 8 million acres of solar panels. That's just a tiny section of Texas. And if you think that's a lot, we already use 10 million acres for coal and 26 million acres for oil and gas. And 41% of all land in the US is used for cattle. All right, let's get started on making these 23 billion solar panels that we need to... But that's not a practical solution. It's never gonna happen. What's the tangible solution to climate change? Part 2 of our climate series. The solution to climate change in theory is very simple. Just get off of fossil fuels and move over to something like solar, wind, geothermal. But there has to be a fundamental change in the way we see energy. It has to be unified, one system, electrification. To truly get to net zero emissions, we have to electrify everything from cars to trucks and planes, even cargo ships. In its lifetime, the average electric vehicle has a 25% lower carbon footprint than any gas car. And that number could increase dramatically if it wasn't produced with coal and gas. Imagine if we lived in a world driven by renewable energy. The future of energy is localized. Each of us have to become responsible for producing and manufacturing our own energy. Today, we rely on just a couple major sources like coal and gas. This means getting energy from things like solar and wind and geothermal. The most important thing, though, is how we store that energy. When we think of standard batteries today, we think of clunky, inefficient, expensive things. But in the future, it's got to change. If we can optimize these batteries to become more efficient, faster at charging, more powerful, when you combine solar, greener sources of energy with batteries, you can solve anything. The solid-state battery is an emerging technology that can revolutionize everything. It doesn't have any moving parts or liquids. It has a 2.5 times higher energy density than lithium-ion batteries, and it charges 4 to 6 times faster. Imagine cars that can do 1,000 miles per charge, or charge within 20 minutes. Also emerging is perovskite solar cells. Standard cells get about 30% efficiency, but this perovskite material can get up to 50% efficiency. This flexible sheet-like material can be used in building windows and even shades. But this technology is years away. We need something that we can do now. The good news is that renewable energy is one of the fastest growing energy sectors. The issue is, with this transition, it's going to take time. What we can do now is minimize our impact on the environment. Animal agriculture accounts for about 15% of global greenhouse emissions. That's more than the entire transportation sector combined. Fishing alone accounts for just as much greenhouse gas emissions than all airlines. Going plant-based or vegan is the single biggest thing we can all do individually to make a difference. Study after study shows that plant-based diets are way better for the environment, in many cases lowering carbon footprints by 60 to 70%. Even eating vegan for 1 day a week has lower emissions than buying local meat. Think of how many resources it takes to feed these cows and give them water. 60% of global deforestation is caused by animal farming. 80% of the Amazon rainforest is being destroyed and burned for animal farming. The lungs of the earth. These rainforests sequester CO2 from the atmosphere. Once they're gone, so are we. If we want to reduce the impacts of climate change, what we eat and how we live has to be a major factor in how we move forward. People love to blame capitalism for climate change. But the oil companies only supply what you demand. So if you demand better, greener products, those oil companies are either going to supply them or go out of business. That's how capitalism works. Why not use it to your advantage? Why not leverage capitalism? Why not make it work for us in our favor? So you can blame the oil companies, but you're the ones paying them to pollute. It all comes back down to the consumer, you and me. The educated consumer is the one that's going to solve climate change. The decisions that you make as a consumer have way more power and way more impact on our society than you think. If you think you're powerless, just remember that 60 to 70% of your emissions can be reduced simply by going plant-based. Only a few percent of people are vegan or plant-based. Look at these global food chains bringing in these plant-based options all of a sudden. You have a profound impact on how much you can change the marketplace around you. We gotta stop being distracted by the politics of climate change. It's not a left or right thing, it's a global thing. Because the benefits, the solutions, benefit all of us. The only way out of climate change is to innovate our way out, like we've done for centuries. Innovation and engineering and science and technology, these are the engines of prosperity in our world. This is what has made our society the way it is today. That's why I promote science literacy. But if we, the people, can't even grasp the scientific issues that are surrounding us, how are we going to solve them when we have the power? And the great news is that the green technology is already winning in the marketplace. Solar and wind are now the cheapest forms of energy. People are buying up electric vehicles at record rates. The solutions were known 50 years ago. We had 50 years for this change to happen. It's been delayed. It all comes back to education. So I know you're tired of the doom and gloom about climate change. We're over it. But the solution is accessible and readily tangible for everybody. Don't tell me you're powerless. When you are a consumer in today's world, don't tell me you're powerless when you can reduce your carbon emissions by 60 to 70% just by implementing a plant-based diet. Don't tell me you're powerless. Stop pointing fingers at capitalism or the oil companies and start realizing that we have more power than you can imagine. So what's in our way of stopping climate change? It's not the oil companies. We employ them. It's not the lack of technology. It's already here and underway. It's been here for 50 years. It's not that we're powerless. The only things in our way of stopping climate change are ignorance and fear.